Boom, 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 boom. Mr. Codeman, yes, bring me a new system. Make it control wisdom and intelligence and other attributes, yo. That felt good. Still don't feel good, but let me try to get some shit done. So I'm gonna start training my little shit again. Bow, bow. Well, y'all want to hear stuff about infinite paths or anything worth a poop? I hope you know you all travel at the speed of light. From my reference frame, if I could get you to travel at the speed of light, why by God, that would be the speed of light squared. Bum, 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 bum. You turn into pure energy, yes you would. Boring. I'm sorry, I should really prepare things. I don't know why I don't. I really don't know why I talk to myself either, but here I am. Boom, 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 boom. I want to listen to something sinusy. Something new. I hate listening to something old. Golly, I might listen to something old. I'll be alright. Listen to the basics of quarks and chromodynamics. Well, that's like 9 minutes. Oh, YouTube, why must you fail me? I guess I'll listen to the entropy thing. I was sharing that with somebody today. Oh, everybody. It's on my Facebook.
My energy bill dropped from $150 to $50.
Entropy is like when you have a cup. The way they explain it, when you have like a cup full of milk and a cup full of coffee, those are two different states of entropy. And when you pour them in there and it mixes, that's chaos, you know. And when they're both milk and they're both coffee, that's not chaos. That's complete and total order. So when you mix them in, it creates this chaos and all that mixing around through that energy exchange or exchange between densities until it becomes a solution, or I think that's what it'd be called. But yeah, all that's what life is, man. It's fucking wacky, wacky. God damn it, all these fucking commercials.
One of the most important, yet least understood, concepts in all of physics. It governs everything from molecular collisions to humongous storms, from the beginning of the universe, through its entire evolution, to its inevitable end. It may in fact determine the direction of time and even be the reason that life exists. To see the confusion around this topic, you need ask only one simple question. What does the Earth get from the sun?
What does the Earth get from sun?
Vitamin D. We get vitamin D from.
We do get vitamin D from the ultraviolet rays.
Well, a lot of energy.
What does the Earth get from this energy?
Yes, energy.
Energy.
Nailed it. Every day the Earth gets a certain amount of energy from the sun. And then how much energy does the Earth radiate back into space relative to the
Hello.
energy it gets from the sun?
Probably not as much. I don't believe that it's just radiating right back.
I'd say less.
Less. I would say less.
I'd guess about 70%.
I think it's a fraction.
I'd say 20%.
Because we use some of it.
We use some of the energy.
We consume a lot, right?
Zoho One gives you a comprehensive set of unified tools to grow and streamline your business. Zoho One helps you win customers, elevate marketing, simplify accounting, generate insights, streamline operations, empower employees, foster collaboration, and run your business. With Zoho One, you get the tools to hit your business goals. More than 60,000 businesses trust.
But the thing about energy is it never really goes away. You can't really use it up.
It would have to break even, wouldn't it? Same amount, yeah.
You know, cause and effect, it'd be equal in some ways, right?
For most of the Earth's history, it should be exactly the same amount of energy in from the sun as Earth radiates into space.
Wow.
Because if we didn't do that, then the Earth would get a lot hotter. That'd be a problem.
That'd be a big problem.
So if that is the case,
Yeah.
then what are we really getting from the sun?
That's a good question.
It gives us a nice tan.
It gives us a nice tan. I love it. We're getting something special from the sun,
I don't know. What do we get without the energy?
but nobody talks about it.
To answer that, we have to go back to a discovery made 2 centuries ago. In the winter of 1813, France was being invaded by the armies of Austria, Prussia, and Russia. The son of one of Napoleon's generals was Sadi Carnot, a 17-year-old student. On December 29th, he writes a letter to Napoleon to request to join in the fight. Napoleon, preoccupied in battle, never replies. But Carnot gets his wish a few months later when Paris is attacked. The students defend a chateau just east of the city. But they're no match for the advancing armies, and Paris falls after only a day of fighting. Forced to retreat, Carnot is devastated. 7 years later, he goes to visit his father, who's fled to Prussia after Napoleon's downfall. His father was not only a general, but also a physicist. He wrote an essay on how energy is most efficiently transferred in mechanical systems. When his son comes to visit, they talk at length about the big breakthrough of the time, steam engines. Steam engines were already being used to power ships, mine ore, and excavate ports. And it was clear that the future industrial and military might of nations depended on having the best steam engines. But French designs were falling behind those of other countries, like Britain. So Sadi Carnot took it upon himself to figure out why. At the time, even the best steam engines only converted around 3% of thermal energy into useful mechanical work. If he could improve on that, he could give France a huge advantage and restore its place in the world. So he spends the next 3 years studying heat engines. And one of his key insights involves how an ideal heat engine would work, one with no friction and no losses to the environment. It looks something like this. Take 2 really big metal bars, one hot and one cold. The engine consists of a chamber filled with air, where heat can only flow in or out through the bottom. Inside the chamber is a piston, which is connected to a flywheel. The air starts at a temperature just below that of the hot bar. So first, the hot bar is brought into contact with the chamber. The air inside expands with heat flowing into it to maintain its temperature. This pushes the piston up, turning the flywheel. Next, the hot bar is removed, but the air in the chamber continues to expand. Except now, without heat entering, the temperature decreases, in the ideal case, until it is the temperature of the cold bar. The cold bar is brought into contact with the chamber, and the flywheel pushes the piston down. And as the air is compressed, heat is transferred into the cold bar. The cold bar is removed, the flywheel compresses the gas further, increasing its temperature until it is just below that of the hot bar. Then the hot bar is connected again, and the cycle repeats. Through this process, heat from the hot bar is converted into the energy of the flywheel. And what's interesting to note about Carnot's ideal engine is that it is completely reversible. If you ran the engine in reverse, first the air expands, lowering the temperature. Then the chamber is brought into contact with the cold bar. The air expands more, drawing in heat from the cold bar. Next, the air is compressed, increasing its temperature. The chamber is placed on top of the hot bar, and the energy of the flywheel is used to return the heat back into the hot bar. However many cycles were run in the forward direction, you could run the same number in reverse, and at the end, everything would return to its original state, with no additional input of energy required. So by running an ideal engine, nothing really changes. You can always undo what you did. So what is the efficiency of this engine? Since it's fully reversible, you might expect the efficiency to be 100%. But that is not the case. Each cycle, the energy of the flywheel increases by the amount of heat flowing into the chamber from the hot bar, minus the heat flowing out of the chamber at the cold bar. So to calculate the efficiency, we divide this energy by the heat input from the hot bar. Now the heat in on the hot side is equal to the work done by the gas on the piston, and this will always be greater than the work done by the piston on the gas on the cold side, which equals the heat out. And this is because on the hot side, the hot gas exerts a greater pressure on the piston than that same gas when cold. To increase the efficiency of the engine, you could increase the temperature of the hot side, or decrease the temperature of the cold side, or both. Lord Kelvin learns of Carnot's ideal heat engine and realizes it could form the basis for an absolute temperature scale.
I don't think this is probably the most awesome way to do this, but it'll work for now.
So much that it cools to the point where all the gas particles effectively stop moving.
Let's probably pause that and say something or another. Blah, blah, blah. Isn't it great? I think I need to maybe just do a dictionary of stuff so I can just cycle through and get 5 numbers and then assign them. Just do it this way. Fuck, it's only gonna. You only have to do this when I start the dude up. Nope. I'll see what ChatGPT has to say about it afterwards, and maybe it can teach me how to do something a little better. Oh yeah, I need to do this one stupid ass thing. Why are you doing this, Billy? Why are you doing this?
Then they would exert no pressure on the piston, and it would take no work to compress it on the cold side, so no heat would be lost. This is the idea of absolute zero, and it would make for a 100% efficient engine. Using this absolute temperature scale, the Kelvin scale, we can replace the amount of heat in and out with the temperature of the hot and cold side respectively, because they are directly proportional. So we can express efficiency like this, which we can rewrite like this. What we have learned is that the efficiency of an ideal heat engine doesn't depend on the materials or the design of the engine, but fundamentally on the temperatures of the hot and cold sides. To reach 100% efficiency, you'd need infinite temperature on the hot side or absolute zero on the cold side, both of which are impossible in practice. So even with no friction or losses to the environment, it's impossible to make a heat engine 100% efficient. And that's because to return the piston to its original position, you need to dump heat into the cold bar, so not all the energy stays in the flywheel. Now, in Carnot's time, high-pressure steam engines could only reach temperatures up to 160 degrees Celsius, so their theoretical maximum efficiency was 32%, but their real efficiency was more like 3%. That's because real engines experience friction, dissipate heat to the environment, and they don't transfer heat at constant temperatures. So for just as much heat going in, less energy ends up in the flywheel. The rest is spread out over the walls of the cylinder, the axle of the flywheel, and is radiated out into the environment. When energy spreads out like this, it is impossible to get it back. So this process is irreversible. The total amount of energy didn't change, but it became
in the
less
editor,
usable.
we ain't gonna see
Energy
these
is
son
most
bitches.
usable when it is concentrated,
Think
and
about
less
that.
usable when it's spread out. Decades later, German physicist Rudolf Clausius studies Carnot's engine, and he comes up with a way to measure how spread out the energy is. He calls this quantity.
Your users love your platform, but when it's time to build their website, they look elsewhere. Do you see the opportunity? New revenue, happier users. But building a website builder means months before shipping and distraction from your core product. And then you abandon website builder feature for years. What if you could offer websites without building the builder? Your users get one-click website launch. The 10Web AI Website Builder API handles everything. Users generate and edit websites with AI, customize with a drag-and-drop builder, launch blazing fast, e-commerce ready sites, and access the power of WordPress all in one place. Websites are built with all the functionality your users need connected seamlessly with your platform. We handle hosting, updates, backups, and full 24/7 support, all white-labeled under your brand. Grow your platform, delight your customers, launch websites before your competitors even scope the project. Book your demo today.
Certainty starts here with the original equipment parts from GM Genuine Parts and AC Delco that continuously evolve to meet the needs of today's advanced vehicles.
Entropy. When all the energy is concentrated in the hotbar, that is low entropy. But as the energy spreads to the surroundings, the walls of the chamber and the axle, well, entropy increases. This means the same amount of energy is present, but in this more dispersed form, it is less available to do work. In 1865, Clausius summarizes the first two laws of thermodynamics like this. First, the energy of the universe is constant. Second, the entropy of the universe tends to a maximum. In other words, energy spreads out over time. The second law is core to so many phenomena in the world. It's why hot things cool down and cool things heat up, why gas expands to fill a container, why you can't have a perpetual motion machine, because the amount of usable energy in a closed system is always decreasing. The most common way to describe entropy is as disorder, which makes sense because it is associated with things becoming more mixed, random, and less ordered. But I think the best way to think about entropy is as the tendency of energy to spread out. So why does energy spread out over time? I mean, most of the laws of physics work exactly the same way, forwards or backwards in time. So how does this clear time dependence arise? Well, let's consider two small metal bars, one hot and one cold. For this simple model, we'll consider only 8 atoms per bar. Each atom vibrates according to the number of energy packets it has. The more packets, the more it vibrates. So let's start with 7 packets of energy in the left bar and 3 in the right. The number of energy packets in each bar is what we'll call a state. First, let's consider just the left bar. It has 7 energy packets which are free to move around the lattice. This happens non-stop. The energy packets hop randomly from atom to atom, giving different configurations of energy. But the total energy stays the same the whole time. Now let's bring the cold bar back in with only 3 packets and touch them together. the energy packets can now hop around between both bars, creating different configurations. Each unique configuration is equally likely. So what happens if we take a snapshot at one instant in time and see where all the energy packets are? So stop. Look at this. Now there are 9 energy packets in the left bar and only 1 in the right bar. So heat has flowed from cold to hot. Shouldn't that be impossible because it decreases entropy? Well, this is where Ludwig Boltzmann made an important insight. Heat flowing from cold to hot is not impossible, it's just improbable. There are 91,520 configurations with 9 energy packets in the left bar, but 627,264 with 5 energy packets in each bar. That is, the energy is more than 6 times as likely to be evenly spread between the bars. But if you add up all the possibilities, you find there's still a 10.5% chance that the left bar ends up with more energy packets than it started. So why don't we observe this happening around us? Well, watch what happens as we increase the number of atoms to 80 per bar and the energy packets to 100, with 70 in the left bar and 30 in the right. There is now only a 0.05% chance that the left solid ends up hotter than it started. And this trend continues as we keep scaling up the system. In everyday solids, there are around 100 trillion atoms and even more energy packets. So heat flowing from cold to hot is just so unlikely that it never happens.
Humidity shouldn't control your drying process, you should. Your customers expect the best. We're here to help you achieve that.
Think of it like this Rubik's Cube. Right now, it is completely solved, but I'm going to close my eyes and make some turns at random. If I keep doing this, it will get further and further from being solved. But how can I be confident that I'm really messing this cube up? Well, because there's only one way for it to be solved, a few ways for it to be almost solved, and quintillions of ways for it to be almost entirely random. Without thought and effort, every turn moves the Rubik's Cube from a highly unlikely state, that of it being solved, to a more likely state, a total mess. So if the natural tendency of energy is to spread out and for things to get messier, then how is it possible to have something like air conditioning, where the cold interior of a house gets cooler and the hot exterior gets hotter? Energy is going from cold to hot, decreasing the entropy of the house. Well, this decrease in entropy is only possible by increasing the entropy a greater amount somewhere else. In this case, at a power plant, the concentrated chemical energy in coal is being released, heating up the power plant and its environment, spreading to the turbine, the electric generators, heating the wires all the way to the house, and producing waste heat in the fans and compressor. Whatever decrease in entropy is achieved at the house is more than paid for by an increase in entropy required to make that happen. But if total entropy is constantly increasing, and anything we do only accelerates that increase,
then how is there any structure left on Earth? How are there hot parts separate from cold parts? How does life exist? Well, if the Earth were a closed system, the energy would spread out completely, meaning all life would cease, everything would decay and mix, and eventually reach the same temperature. But luckily, Earth is not a closed system, because we have the sun. What the sun really gives us is a steady stream of low entropy, that is, concentrated, bundled up energy.
The energy that we get from the sun is more useful than the energy we give back. It's more compact, it's more clumped together.
Plants capture this energy and use it to grow and create sugars. Then animals eat plants and use that energy to maintain their bodies and move around. Bigger animals get their energy by eating smaller animals, and so on. And each step of the way, the energy becomes more spread out.
Okay, interesting. Yeah.
Oh wow, I did not know that.
There you go.
Ultimately, all the energy that reaches Earth from the sun is converted into thermal energy, and then it's radiated back into space.
But in fact, it's the same amount. I know this isn't...
You do know this is...
I'm a PhD physicist.
Oh, okay.
But anyway,
I trust you.
The increase in entropy can be seen in the relative number of photons arriving at and leaving the Earth. For each photon received from the sun, 20 photons are emitted. And everything that happens on Earth, plants growing, trees falling, herds stampeding, hurricanes and tornadoes, people eating, sleeping, and breathing, all of it happens in the process of converting fewer higher energy photons into 20 times as many lower energy photons. Without a source of concentrated energy and a way to discard the spread out energy, life on Earth would not be possible. It has even been suggested that life itself may be a consequence of the second law of thermodynamics. If the universe tends toward maximum entropy, then life offers a way to accelerate that natural tendency, because life is spectacularly good at converting low entropy into high entropy. For example, the surface layer of seawater produces between 30 to 680% more entropy when cyanobacteria and other organic matter is present than when it's not. Jeremy England takes this one step further. He's proposed that if there is a constant stream of clumped up energy, this could favor structures that dissipate that energy. And over time, this results in better and better energy dissipators, eventually resulting in life. Or, in his own words, you start with a random clump of atoms, and if you shine light on it for long enough, it should not be so surprising that you get a plant. So, life on Earth survives on the low entropy from the sun. But then, where did the sun get its low entropy? The answer is the universe. If we know that the total entropy of the universe is increasing with time, then it was lower entropy yesterday, and even lower entropy the day before that, and so on all the way back to the Big Bang. So right after the Big Bang, that is when the entropy was lowest. This is known as the past hypothesis, It doesn't explain why the entropy was low, just that it must have been that way for the universe to unfold as it has. But the early universe was hot, dense, and almost completely uniform. I mean, everything was mixed and the temperature was basically the same everywhere, varying by at most 0.001%. So how is this low entropy? Well, the thing we've left out is gravity. Gravity tends to clump matter together. So taking gravity into account, having matter all spread out like this would be an extremely unlikely state. And that is why it's low entropy. Over time, as the universe expanded and cooled, matter started to clump together in more dense regions. And in doing so, enormous amounts of potential energy were turned into kinetic energy. And this energy could also be used, like how water flowing downhill can power a turbine. But as bits of matter started hitting each other, some of their kinetic energy was converted into heat. So the amount of useful energy decreased, thereby increasing entropy. Over time, the useful energy was used. In doing so, stars, planets, galaxies, and life were formed, increasing entropy all along. The universe started with around 10 to the 88 Boltzmann constants worth of entropy. Nowadays, all the stars in the observable universe have about
If y'all can learn about the Boltzmann brain, let me tell you about it, man. Boo-da-boo. It's more likely that it's just me here. Boltzmann brain is more likely that a random grouping of particles came together and formed a complete brain, complete with memories of everything that I'm doing right now. That's more likely than to have this whole universe that existed and did all that is done to accommodate me right now.
9.5 times 10 to the 80. The interstellar and intergalactic medium combined have almost 10 times more, but still only a fraction of the early universe. A lot more is contained in neutrinos and in photons of the cosmic microwave background. In 1972, Jacob Bekenstein proposed another source of entropy: black holes. He suggested that the entropy of a black hole should be proportional to its surface area. So as a black hole grows, its entropy increases. Famous physicists thought the idea was nonsense, and for good reason. According to classical thermodynamics, if black holes have entropy, then they should also have a temperature. But if they have temperatures, they should emit radiation and not be black after all.
If you're feeling the pain of your sales and accounting teams being out of sync, Zoho One can help. With Zoho One, sales can create quotes and invoices.
No, another damned ad.
The person who set out to prove Bekenstein wrong was Stephen Hawking. But to his surprise, his results showed that black holes do emit radiation, now known as Hawking radiation, and they do have a temperature. The black hole at the center of the Milky Way has a temperature of about 100 trillionth of a Kelvin, emitting radiation that is far too weak to detect, so still pretty black. But Hawking confirmed that black holes have entropy, and Bekenstein was right. Hawking was able to refine Bekenstein's proposal and determine just how much entropy they have. The supermassive black hole at the center of the Milky Way has about 10 to the 91 Boltzmann constants of entropy. That is 1,000 times as much as the early observable universe, and 10 times more than all the other particles combined. And that is just one black hole. All black holes together account for 3 times 10 to the 104 Boltzmann constants worth of entropy. So almost all the entropy of the universe is tied up in black holes. That means the early universe only had about 0.0000000000003%
of the entropy it has now. So the entropy was low, and everything that happens in the universe, like planetary systems forming, galaxies merging, asteroids crashing, stars
This shit is
dying,
confusing, huh?
life
They're
itself
hard to.
flourishing, all of
Really
that can happen
counterintuitive, I
because
guess.
the entropy of the universe was low, and it has been increasing. And it all happens only in one direction. We never see an asteroid uncrash or a planetary system unmix into the cloud of dust and gas that made it up. There is a clear difference between going to the past and the future, and that difference comes from entropy. The fact that we are going from unlikely to more likely states is why there is an arrow of time. This is expected to continue until, eventually, the energy gets spread out so completely that nothing interesting will ever happen again. This is the heat death of the universe. In the distant future, more than 10 to the 100 years from now, after the last black hole has evaporated, the universe will be in its most probable state. Now, even on large scales, you would not be able to tell the difference between time moving forwards or backwards, and the arrow of time itself would disappear. So it sounds like entropy is this awful thing that leads us
I wonder if the
inevitably
character data in
towards
this
the dullest outcome
attributes too.
But just because maximum entropy has low complexity does not mean that low entropy has maximum complexity. It's actually more like this tea and milk. I mean, holding it like this is not very interesting. But as I pour the milk in, the two start to mix, and these beautiful patterns emerge. They arise in an instant, and before you know it, they're gone, back to being featureless. Both low and high entropy are low in complexity. It's in the middle where complex structures appear and thrive. And since that's where we find ourselves, let's make use of the low entropy we've got while we can. With the right tools, we can understand just about anything, from a cup of tea cooling down to the evolution of the entire universe. And if you're looking for a free and easy way to add powerful tools to your arsenal, then you should check out this video's sponsor, Brilliant.org. With Brilliant, you can master key concepts in everything from math and data science to programming and physics. All you need to do is set your goal, and Brilliant will design the perfect learning path for you, equipping you with all the tools you need to reach it. Want to learn how to think like a programmer? Then Brilliant's latest course, Thinking in Code, is a fast and easy way to get there. Using an intuitive drag and drop
Dragons? No, I don't. I self-taught myself in GW Basic, and then I started doing AutoCAD, and I did Lisp. And then I do Windows scripting, and that led me into a little bit of C. And so that's really what I'm doing now, is trying to beef up my C. In the project I'm doing, I'm making some AI little bots, training them to walk. But I'm trying to lower the amount of observations I have so I can train faster, because I'm stuck on a little 2060. And so it takes it a while. Right now my observation size is like 5,000 or something like that. So I'm trying to whittle it down. Sorry if I didn't notice you for a while. Love you. But I did a lot of automation. When I first started programming way in my youth on a little handy. It was just about, you know, like making little color patterns and stuff. I mean, there wasn't really much you could do with GW Basic back then. But when I got into professional life, I started using AutoCAD's internal programming language, Lisp, which is not, you know, Lisp is used in other things, but I think AutoCAD is slightly a little bit different. So, but then, like I said, Lisp and AutoCAD opens up VB. And then through Windows scripting, I can transfer information through ARX and COM dialogues in between different applications, so I could do a whole bunch of automation. Yeah. But I'm out of the professional game now, and so it's just kind of a hobby. Yeah, so good brain exercise. It makes me jolly. I like this channel, Dark Brandon. He usually got something good to say. Not always gold, but what is?
He did nothing. He also talks. Hey there, folks. I hope you're doing well today. Today we're going to look at Trump's xenophobic behavior towards Somalians, how that translates into policy, explore the idea about how this is all to bring the Groypers closer back into supporting the administration, all while we see Don Jr. skirt around disavowing Nick Fuentes, and then to see Nick Fuentes actually take responsibility for Trump's Somalian xenophobic behavior. How did we get to this timeline? So let's begin with some of the comments Donald Trump recently made about Somalians.
Somalians ripped off that state for billions of dollars. Billions. Every year. Billions of dollars. And they contribute nothing. The welfare is like 88%. They contribute nothing. I don't want them in our country, I'll be honest with you, okay? Somebody say, oh, that's not politically correct. I don't care. I don't want them in our country. Their country's no good for a reason. Their country stinks, and we don't want them in our country. I could say that about other countries, too. I can say it about other countries, too. We don't want them to hell. We have to rebuild our country. You know, our country's at a tipping point.
Okay, so let's break down some of the things he says there and explain why these ideas are so flawed. He talks about ripping off that state for billions and they contributed nothing. He also talks about the welfare is like 88%, and again repeats this idea that they contribute nothing. And so first of all, he's presenting a made-up statistic as fact. There is no 88%.
I see the game manager in here.
And what he's trying to do is frame an entire immigrant group as economic parasites. And this is a classic xenophobic trope. It treats all members of a nationality like a burden and ignores actual economic data showing immigrants contribute to GDP, taxes, labor markets, and population sustainability. And then we see him take it even further, right? This idea they contribute nothing. He then goes on to say, I don't want them in our country. Their country is no good. The country stinks. Assigning the failures or challenges of an entire country to the worth of its people treats human beings as contaminated by their birthplaces. This is a common theme we see with racists, implying that people from majority black and majority Muslim regions
Okay, so we did do health math. Good.
inferior or undesirable. So incredibly racist behavior from the President of the United States.
And we're going to go the wrong way if we keep taking in garbage into our country. Ilhan Omar is garbage. She's garbage. Her friends are garbage. These aren't people that work. These aren't people that say, let's go, come on, let's make this place great. These are people that do nothing but complain. They complain. And from where they came from, they got nothing. You know, they came from paradise, and they said, this isn't paradise. But when they come from hell, and they complain, and do nothing but bitch, we don't want them in our country. Let them go back to where they came from and fix it.
And so here, calling entire groups garbage is explicitly dehumanizing. It moves from policy critique to biological inherent inferiority. And what we see Donald Trump doing here is using a rhetoric that mirrors historic racist propaganda that compared targeted groups to waste,
No.
vermin, or pollution. And then here, when he's talking about these people do nothing but complain, they came from hell, he's trying to frame these immigrants as ungrateful, angry, and lazy. And then again, once he talks about their homeland being hell, he's really trying to intentionally strip their homeland of dignity. Historically, describing black or non-European countries as hellholes has been used to justify racial hierarchy, and something we've seen Donald Trump actually do in the past. Oh, no, wait, he called them shitholes. And then he lands the plane on this classic xenophobic command, let them go back to where they came from. Then this has been used to bully immigrants or anyone with a perceived foreign background for ages. It assumes that they don't belong regardless of citizenship. And that's not what America's about. America is a country of immigrants that stole the land from the Native Americans, but that's a whole other story. Now, what does that look like in policy?
3 ICE raids are now underway across the Twin Cities, including in Somali and majority immigrant neighborhoods.
Just like every day at this Lake Street shopping center, plenty of clothing, jewelry, and food fill Carmel Mall on Lake Street. The only thing missing on Wednesday was some of its regulars, customers and tenants, according to the property owner, Bassem Sabri.
And many businesses are closed, and they're not operating, and they're not coming. And they're scared to be here.
Sabri says he believes ICE agents are targeting the mall and neighborhood because most of its businesses are Somali-owned.
Today and yesterday, the neighborhood was stormed with ICE agents. In fact, my security guys have to ask them to move out of the lot.
The White House says ICE is not targeting Somalis in Minneapolis, but enforcing deportation orders.
We're going to enforce the laws of this country without apology, including in the Twin Cities. Focuses on those Twin Cities more because of the criminal activities been uncovered by DOJ and DHS.
Now, what was the border czar mentioning there? And Donald Trump referenced it too when he said they ripped off the state. We're going to learn in this next clip. Let's take a look.
The national spotlight on Minnesota's Somali community comes after charges and convictions in various fraud schemes of government programs, including Feeding Our Future.
But not every Somali did that. And those people were prosecuted.
Flyers now dot the mall doors and windows saying ICE won't be allowed entrance without a warrant. This comes on the same day Minneapolis Mayor Jacob Frey directed staff to create signs for private business owners who want to mark their property as off-limits for these immigration activities, and signed an executive order prohibiting agents from using any city-owned parking lots, ramps, garages, or vacant lots for immigration operations.
And so the resident we saw there said it very clearly.
Opioids have taken many things from my life, and opioids took the lives of many people that I grew up with. Opioids take.
What? What are you doing? There you go.
An entire group accountable by a few people's actions. And those people that broke the law were held accountable. And so now, let's keep in mind, this all happened when Donald Trump was at his lowest poll ratings. We were seeing a giant civil war happening among his supporters. And not only that, but we saw this new movement, America First, emerge to kind of compete against MAGA with the idea that America First has more extremist views, especially towards immigration. And so we should be asking ourselves, is Donald Trump trying to pander to the groypers and similar groups? And there's evidence we could look to a recent interview between Jillian Michaels and Don Jr. Let's roll the tape.
I mentioned the fact that I think your father has made the Republican Party more open. Obviously, I think it's for the better. Now you're starting to see some of the things in the alt-right fringe of the Nick Fuentes and the Young Republican group chat that is racist and that is scary and sexist to an alarming degree with someone like Nick Fuentes. And I'm wondering, you're seeing this kind of fracture of the left. I'm seeing people who are more moderate become alarmed. And people on the right are like, yeah, whatever, not a big deal. I'm here to tell you it's a big deal. And I think it's a big deal Because all of those people that your dad invited in, Tulsi, Kennedy, myself, inadvertently, right? All of these more, Rogan, all of these more moderate people who fleed the crazy on the left are alarmed if the right doesn't disavow the Nick Fuenteses. And it doesn't mean, I'm not saying cancel Tucker Carlson. That is not what I'm saying. I wish Tucker had handled him differently. I have no problem saying that. But I do think it's going to be a problem.
And so here in this first clip, we just really see all the challenges that Jillian's facing. She got in bed with MAGA, and MAGA got in bed with the far-right extremists. And now she's looking at her bedfellows and she's like, oh, shit. But in all...
Alright, so health max, stamina max. Modified by the strength and the stamina for the health. That makes sense. Stamina is modified by dexterity and how strong you are.
RFK Jr. and Tulsi Gabbard. But let's see where the conversation goes.
And I'm wondering if you see it as a problem for the right.
Grayed out though. That's weird. What's going on with that?
128, because I think if this continues without it being fully condemned aggressively, I think you get Gavin Newsom for president, and I know what that looks like, and it's scary stuff.
Yeah, listen, I'm a little torn on the issue. I think sometimes, having been canceled and having, for even common sense things, I'm not about cancel culture, but I think sometimes, I don't know, you have to platform everyone, but, let them sort of speak. And I think some of those radicals, they sort of give themselves up in many cases in their own things. And I'm good friends with Tucker, and I actually don't think he's really all that radical at all. I do see a lot of stuff that's sort of manufactured crises. I see a lot of sort of the neocon handles trying to create a complex to break it up because they want to go back to the old ways, not the America First ways.
And so that reference right there, where he's talking about the neocon handles, trying to create these conflicts, trying to break it up because they want to go back to the old ways, not the America First ways, he is pandering 100% right there to the Groypers and Nick Fuentes. And so not only is Don Jr. sending a message here, but so is Donald Trump himself when he was talking about Somalians. But let's keep going a little bit further with Don Jr. before we hear from Nick Fuentes and what he thinks about all this.
I do think that sort of social media and the way those things have been manipulated, and some of these, the stuff you're seeing even this week with, this account that's, America First is, driven out of, some country in the middle of nowhere. It's like they're actually trying to sow discord and create, a fight that probably really doesn't exist with the vast majority of people.
And so here we see Don Jr. kind of playing some of the cards out of his dad's playbook, right? He's really trying to play things down. It's not a big deal.
And so, I think we have to have conversations, even conversations we don't want to hear, or even conversations we think may be disgusting, and listen, and then people will make up their minds, and they'll sort of,
Keep doing. Golly, why can't I watch and type?
You figure it out on your
Get?
I'm just deeply concerned that if there's a guy who says
Holy fuck.
and somebody does not say
Holy fucking fuck.
who we are as a party, this is not conservatism.
Oh my fucking god.
Repulsive.
Oh, because I got that. I hate that. It used to be that I'd forget to do the semicolon after the end of everything. God, man, every time I switched over, it'd be like a million of those. Missing semicolon, missing semicolon.
How good a night are you?
We'll see. It's this way. Came for the tourney?
Journey is a contest for knights. You a knight?
I'm no farmer.
Yet you've come dressed as one.
Sir, I could scribe you. And you could teach me. Every night needs a scribe.
Oh dear God, an advertisement now.
And so right there, Jillian is basically asking Don Jr., she's saying, hey, he said this, and we need someone to call him out. What do you think Don's going to do?
I also think sometimes even acknowledging what you do, if you're going to acknowledge every person that says something ridiculous, all of a sudden you're just making them bigger in a way.
And so right there, we see Jillian asking Don with desperation, please call this guy out. This is something really horrible, he said. And Don's response? was to step right out of the way and just dodge the entire thing. Now, let's keep in mind the Civil War came about because Tucker Carlson interviewed Nick Fuentes. And from there, we saw MAGA really take two sides. You were either on the Tucker Carlson, Nick Fuentes side, or you were on more of that traditional Republican MAGA side. And right now, it looks like Donald Trump and Don Jr. have really picked the side, the Tucker Carlson, Nick Fuentes side, to take things a little more extreme, to pander to Nick Fuentes and the Groypers. And so, in typical Nick Fuentes fashion, we're going to see him do a victory lap. Let's take a look.
Negative. This is why we need to threaten to withhold our support. This is why we need to make it unignorable and visible, because if we do, then Trump will be forced to pander to us. And he knows how to do it. Nobody's better than him. We just need to create the need, the impetus for it. And now that that has happened, like clockwork, what does Trump do? He dusts off the old playbook and we get Trump 2016 all over again. You're welcome. I'll never get any credit for it, but you are welcome for giving you Trump 2016 back. And by the way, does anybody doubt that the only reason we're getting this is because he's unpopular? Does anybody doubt that for even 1 second? This administration's been a nonstop disaster, one catastrophe after the next. All of a sudden, now you're getting this newfound Trump 2016 rhetoric.
So not only do we see Nick taking this victory lap, but we also see him connecting a lot of the dots
doing
that
high
we're
time
connecting to.
Timing's amazing. Right on the heels of off your election losses, the Tucker Carlson Civil War, and all the discontent in the party. Now we're getting Trump 2016. You're welcome. And look at how beautifully he delivered. Look at how beautifully he understood the assignment completely. He comes out and says, all these brown people do is bitch in their hijabs and they're ungrateful and they stink and we don't want them here. I mean, it couldn't be better if you dreamed it up.
And so there, we see Nick actually twist Donald Trump's words. Donald Trump never talked about hijabs. And in true form, Donald Trump said their country stinks, allowing a lot of interpretation. In Trump speak, he could be trying to say, oh, their country is underperforming, so it stinks. But it's also this double entendre that allows people to say people of that country stink, just as Nick Fuentes is trying to do.
This is out of the wildest imagination of the most obsequious plan truster, and it was delivered to us on a silver platter because we threatened to withhold our support because we said we don't like Trump anymore. And now this is what we get. It's a desperate bid to get our support back. And he knows what to do. He always has. We just need to give him a reason to play that out.
And so there's a lot of interesting takeaways here. Donald Trump is a lame duck president. Really shows how fragile his ego is, that he needs people to like him. But it's even stranger, the people that he wants to like him. The people who are outwardly white nationalist, racist against women. And while the internet makes it feel like there's an overwhelming amount of people that check these boxes, the most recent elections indicate different. We need to remember, Donald Trump is a con artist, and he fooled a lot of people. The question is, how many want to own their mistake versus how many want to double down and become white nationalists? No, boy, I'm going to need to get a gym membership. There's going to be a lot of faces to be eaten.
Alright, all that should be able to tell me exactly how high my guy is going to be. Oh, wait. Height of the pelvic. Oh my, these are gonna be measurements between the joints, yeah. Ba, ba. IQ is like a bucket. It matters what you do with it or if you say fuck it.
Culture, the term IQ is everywhere.
Do IQ exams do that?
You probably need 120 points of IQ.
Don't know my IQ is
IQ.
IQ.
Low IQ individual.
People who boast about their IQ are losers.
When people say IQ, what they mean is intelligence, an objective, rigorous measurement of intellectual ability. But does it actually work? Well, in this video, I want to find out where IQ came from, what does it actually measure, what can it predict about your life, and I guess, what is my IQ? I have never taken an official IQ test before. Honestly, I don't think I'm terribly smart. I've always kind of considered my IQ to be maybe just a little above average.
Exothermic or endothermic? I feel like that should be exothermic.
Good job, science guy.
There are a lot of IQ tests online, but I am very skeptical about their accuracy. Still, I figured some of them may be good practice for the real thing. Tomorrow, I'm going to do an IQ test for real. Before I do that, I want to try to improve my score, and so I'm going to try to do a whole bunch of practice tests. I think this test is trainable, but tomorrow we're going to see whether that's true or not. The idea of intelligence testing goes back hundreds of years, but the first concrete breakthrough occurred in 1904. English psychologist Charles Spearman was studying students' grades in different subjects, and he wondered how their performance in one subject, like English, would relate to their performance in another, like math. One option would be that the better a student did in math, the worse they would do in English, maybe because they spent more time on their math work and so had less time to devote to English. So performance in different subjects would be negatively correlated. Another option was that performance in one subject would be completely unrelated to performance in another. After all, different subjects require different skill sets, so maybe marks would be totally uncorrelated. The third option was that the better a student did in math, the better they would do in English. In other words, their marks would be positively correlated. A correlation coefficient can vary anywhere from -1 to +1. A correlation coefficient of -1 indicates a perfect negative correlation, meaning an increase in one variable corresponds to a precise, predictable decrease in the other variable. Similarly, a correlation of +1 indicates a perfect positive correlation. A correlation of 0 indicates no relationship between the two variables, and any value between 0 and 1 indicates a positive correlation, but the data has some random spread. The square of the correlation coefficient tells you the amount of variation in one variable that can be explained by variation in the other variable. For example, if the correlation coefficient is 0.5, then 25% of the variation in one variable can be explained by the other. When Spearman analyzed his data, he found a clear positive correlation. Students who did better in math also tended to do better in English, and the correlation coefficient was 0.64. But math and English weren't the only subjects the students studied. They also took classics and French, and when Spearman looked at the correlations between all of these subjects, he found the same pattern. Students who did well in one subject tended to do well in them all. So how do you explain this observation? Well, Spearman proposed that each person has some level of general intelligence, what he called the G factor. This construct was meant to capture how quickly students could learn new material, recognize patterns, and think critically regardless of the subject matter.
I think I'm going to leave those outside for now. I'm not solid on those yet, so I might still need to change those.
On all subjects, and those with low G score poorly on all subjects. Spearman published his conclusions.
I'm a high G. What up, G? Me.
Objectively determined and measured. But the correlations weren't perfect. So on top of the G factor, Spearman proposed subject-specific factors, or S factors. A student's performance in math, for example, would depend on their general intelligence plus their subject-specific factor for math. Subject-specific factors could increase or decrease performance on that particular subject. Spearman believed that specific factors could be trained, but general intelligence was fixed. So he wanted to
Alright,
find a
so
way
did
to
all of that so I can get back over here and figure out how many times I can feel a touch.
With figuring out which kids needed more help in school. Together with Theodore Simon, he developed the Binet-Simon.
Oh, Simone!
Students were asked to name what's missing in the drawing, define abstract terms, and repeat back sentences. And there was also this question asking which face is prettiest. There were 30 tasks in all. Their performance was benchmarked against other students of different ages in order to assign them a mental age. For example, if a student performed about as well as the average 8-year-old, their mental age would be 8. This mental age was then divided by their actual age and multiplied by 100 to arrive at a so-called intelligence quotient. And IQ was born. So the Binet-Simon test was the world's first IQ test. It was translated by Goddard into English and brought to the US. At Stanford, Lewis Terman standardized it using a large American sample, and with some modifications, it became the Stanford Binet test. And for decades, it was the most widely used test in the United States. But this was just the start. Many other IQ tests were developed. They all had the same goal of measuring the G factor. The way they did this was by assessing many different mental abilities, including memory, verbal, spatial, and numerical skills. Each one of these areas might have a subject-specific shift, but by averaging them all together, the idea was the subject-specific effects would cancel out, leaving a decent approximation of G. Of course, there would always be some error, but that's why psychologists designed IQ tests with upwards of 7 to 10 sections with distinct tasks to try to minimize subject-specific distortions. All the different IQ tests differed in the number of questions and their difficulty. So to standardize the scoring system, each test was given to a large sample of the population. Raw scores were normalized, usually so the mean was 100 and the standard deviation was 15. And that's how it's still done to this day. This is known as IQ, and it's meant to be a measure of an individual's G factor in comparison to the rest of the population. The way it's scaled, 68% of people have an IQ between 85 and 115. Only around 2% score over 130 or under 70.
Humidity shouldn't control your drying process. You should. Your customer.
Lions, 4 cats, and 7 crows have a total of... Oh, boy. As I was studying for my IQ test, I practiced all the different types of questions that appear on modern tests. One section will almost certainly be on vocabulary. They give you one word, like sanguine, and you have to pick which of the multiple choice options is most similar in meaning. Is it gloomy, asinine, recalcitrant, optimistic, or reflective? They might also ask you to pick a word with the opposite meaning. So what is the opposite of perspicacious? Is it canny, obsequious, dull, fanciful, or sagacious? Another section tests your ability to spot patterns with numbers. So pick the number that best completes the pattern. 3, 5, 8, 12, what comes next? Originally, I was looking for complicated patterns, but as I familiarized myself with the online tests, I discovered the patterns were usually pretty simple. A good technique is to find the difference between adjacent terms. So in this case, the first 2 terms are separated by 2, the next by 3
like that.
and 4. So the logical next term should be 5 more than 12, so 17. The answer is C. Sometimes the numbers grow rapidly, like in the sequence 3, 15, 60, 180. What comes next? In cases like this, I look at the ratio of one number to the one before it. In this case, the second number is 5 times the first. The next number is 4 times bigger, and the next one is 3 times larger. So the answer should be 2 times the fourth term, which is 360. Answer B. One of the best known types of IQ test questions are Raven's progressive matrices. These involve a 3x3 grid with symbols in each of the cells. And you have to select the 9th cell, which follows the pattern. I found that the bulk of these puzzles obey one of only a few different logical rules. One is translational motion, so the symbols move from one cell to the next in a predictable fashion. The second is rotational motion. One or several objects rotate from one cell to the next. The third is missing symbols, where in each row or column, each symbol appears once. So to figure out which symbols appear in the final cell, you just have to spot which ones are missing. And the fourth is addition, where the first cell plus the second cell equals the third cell. In this case, lines that overlap cancel out, but a line plus nothing equals a line. In most modern IQ tests, all the questions are completed under time pressure. You may have only around 10 to 30 seconds per question. Okay, this morning I'm taking an official IQ test, and I gotta say that I'm pretty nervous. I always want to do well on tests, you know, it's something I pride myself on, but at the same time, you know, who knows how this is gonna go. I'm not allowed to take you in there because obviously people don't want the questions getting out, and they don't even want video of what it looks like in there, you know, they're very strict about these things. So, I'm gonna go in, do the test, I'll come out, and I'll let you know how it went. Wish me luck. What's remarkable about IQ tests is that an hour or two of questions on vocabulary, numbers, and arbitrary shapes can predict a surprising amount about your life. For one thing, the higher your IQ, the larger your brain is likely to be. A large meta-analysis from 2005 estimated a correlation of 0.33 between IQ and brain size. So high IQ is literally big brain. IQ is also predictive of school success. In 2007, Scottish psychiatrist Ian Deary measured the IQs of 13,000 11-year-olds. And 5 years later, when these students completed national school examinations, Deary compared their exam marks to their IQs.
Their performance on an IQ test when they were 11 correlated with their performance 5 years later on the GCSEs, about 0.8. That's an extremely high correlation.
It means about 2/3 of the variation in national school examination scores could be predicted by IQ tests taken 5 years.
I don't know if it said this yet, but it's like, you know, it's like, do you know the word absi? I mean, shit, I ain't even heard it. Man, it's like lower income individuals, you know. I heard some of this shit. They've not been introduced to fancy dancy words. It doesn't make their ability to learn less or more. There's a difference between ignorance and stupidity. Ignorance means you haven't had the chance to learn. Stupidity means you don't have the ability to learn. Just because people don't know something doesn't make them stupid. That's stupid.
Prior. Now, the correlation coefficient of this study is at the high end of the 0.2 to 0.8 range found in similar studies, but research supports the claim that IQ is a good predictor of school success. It also predicts how much schooling a person will complete. Maybe this shouldn't be so surprising, since some school tests are essentially IQ tests. It's been argued that tests like the SAT, ACT, and the GRE are basically IQ tests. They correlate with standard IQ tests at around 0.8. Now, on my SAT,
okay, so the number of touches I can understand.
Around 130. So it'll be interesting to see if my official IQ score matches that,
but
or if I was able to increase my score.
Before it gets out of there, I want to make sure.
I don't know. But IQ also has predictive power outside of school. One of the most robust findings is that IQ can predict job success.
Particularly in technical or high complexity jobs.
How do you measure occupational success?
You ask people's bosses to rate them. You ask what people's income is. You measure productivity in ways that economists use about, you know, the output generated.
The correlations typically range from 0.2 to 0.6, and the effect is most notable for more complex jobs, which makes sense. The highest effect is for military training. In fact, the US military will not accept anyone with an IQ under 80. They also limit to 20% the number of recruits with IQs between 81 and 92. During the Vietnam War, in order to increase the pool of applicants, they relaxed this last requirement. But what they found was that those below the threshold were 1.5 to 3 times as likely to fail recruit training. And they required between 3 to 9 times as much remedial training. Taken together, this added so much strain that the military ran more efficiently without the extra recruits. In total, 5,478 people recruited under this initiative died at a fatality rate 3 times higher than ordinary recruits. So the military reinstated their requirements, and today anyone with an IQ less than 80, that is about 30 million Americans, would be ineligible to join the military. Even outside the military, IQ seems to play a role in how long you live.
There we go. No more than 10, no less than 3.
11 years old. Now,
the rest depends on thee
who from the sample was still
and
alive at age 76.
intelligence and the wisdom.
For every 15-point increase on the IQ test, you would be 27% more likely to still be alive at age 76. A large meta-analysis confirms that people with higher IQs have a lower risk of dying during the time frame investigated in each study. The last major thing that IQ seems to predict is income. This study shows a clear tendency for income to increase with IQ, and it found a correlation coefficient of 0.3. But the variance is huge. In fact, the top 3 earners in this study all had IQs below 100. A large meta-analysis of 31 studies found the correlation between IQ and income to be 0.21. That is significant, but small. It means that only 4.4% of the variance in income is explained by IQ. Maybe one of the reasons why we don't see as high a correlation for income.
Okay, and so now there's also touch data. So depending on your intelligence, wisdom, I'm not quite sure just yet. Little character's gonna be able to understand more or less about yeah, touch. If you're highly intelligent, perhaps, maybe. If you're touched, you can tell between what team it is, or like even your vision. You'll be able to tell between what your team you're looking at and stuff. Maybe I'll even do like a counter, like keep looking at the thing for a certain amount of time, then it'll. You have to have a couple of points to be able to understand what you're looking at. That might be interesting. I can't wait to get a better video card because I mean this is pretty complex. So, and it's got actual video camera hooked up to them, but I ain't even got the fucking graphic bandwidth to be trying to fucking run several hundred fucking camera inputs.
Income is just because economically intelligence is not necessarily that highly rewarded, in that maybe there are jobs, like just doing a real estate type scheme, like maybe that doesn't require a huge amount of intelligence. Simultaneously, you have all these very highly intelligent people who maybe become college professors, but that doesn't necessarily pay very well.
Yeah. A lot of people who have very high intelligence scores don't have the same interest in accumulating money.
The relationship with net worth is even weaker. It hardly seems to correlate with IQ, even though people with higher IQs are supposedly more intelligent, and on average, they make more money each year. But this apparently doesn't translate
Average, boy, I'm dragging y'all down.
More money overall. But if IQ correlates with school achievement, job performance, income, and longevity, why don't we hear more about it? Why aren't more people tested? I think it's because IQ has a dark history.
Hey, where are you? I'm on my way.
Can I get a medium coffee, please? A medium?
Boom. Skip that shit.
When Henry Goddard brought Binet's test to America, its use and interpretation shifted dramatically.
Light fall off.
In France, Binet believed intelligence could be improved through education. He designed his test so that struggling students could be given more help to catch up. But in the US, the modified test was given to adults to rank them by intelligence. And researchers
that smells like
Spearman
eugenics.
believed that G was unchangeable, that whatever general intelligence you were born with,
What
you
up,
would
G?
have for the rest of your life. And many thought G was inherited, passed down from parents to children.
Oh, that
These
smells
days,
like
we would say it has a
eugenics.
genetic basis. There is some evidence to support these assertions. IQ appears fairly consistent over one's lifetime.
So they had tests done when people were 11 years old. They found all those tests in a filing cabinet and followed those people up and gave them the same test when they were 90 years old, much, much later.
Their scores, 80 years apart, were correlated at around 0.5 to 0.6. There's also evidence for a genetic basis to IQ.
You find, for instance, that if you get two identical twins and give them an IQ test, they have a very strong correlation. It's actually about the same as giving the same person the test, a few weeks apart.
Henry Goddard used the claims that intelligence was inherited and unchangeable to put IQ at the center of the American eugenics movement. Eugenicists wanted to prevent those with undesirable
What a
traits
fucking
from having
idiot.
kids. In many states, laws were passed to enable forced sterilization of people who failed to meet a certain threshold on an IQ test. The constitutionality of these laws was upheld by the Supreme Court in 1927.
Killed all the
Words
imbeciles.
that we now use as
We wouldn't
insults,
have hardly any Americans.
idiot, imbecile, were used as scientific terms.
In his judgment, Justice Oliver Wendell Holmes wrote, "It is better for all the world if instead of waiting to execute degenerate offspring for crime, or to let them starve for their imbecility, society can prevent those who are manifestly unfit from continuing their kind. 3 generations of imbeciles are enough." In total, over 60,000 people were forcibly sterilized as a result of these laws. In fact, they served as a model for Nazi Germany. Hitler himself claimed to be inspired by American eugenicists.
These have been used for horrific things in the past.
At the Nuremberg trials after the war, some Nazis...
And it's straight up bullshit. I mean, if you listen to Trump nowadays and his merit-based society, look at all the people he fucking surrounds himself with. They don't even know how to fucking use a communication channel. Fucking morons.
Given this awful history, I think it's understandable that many people completely disregard IQ today. On the science of intelligence, there are a number of things those early researchers got wrong. One is that IQ is not entirely determined by genetics. Can you quantify the effects of genetics versus environment?
When you look at twin studies, on average across the whole lifespan, it's about 50.
I mean, let's just like think about like all the lead that some people drink. Fucks your intelligence hardcore.
50 to heritability and environment.
You simply can't, for ethical reasons, estimate it in humans, with a reasonable degree of certainty or accuracy. Given my reading of that literature, it's a pretty broad range, probably somewhere between 40% and 70%.
Okay. And since education can improve IQ, it is not completely fixed over a lifetime. Plus, intelligence might not be a single construct as initially imagined. These days, scientists recognize 2 forms of intelligence, fluid and crystallized. Fluid intelligence is your ability to learn, process information, and solve novel problems, whereas crystallized intelligence involves the knowledge you've accumulated over your lifetime. Both types of intelligence increase throughout childhood, but fluid intelligence peaks in early adulthood and then declines, whereas crystallized intelligence remains more stable. But IQ has been further misused to promote the idea of racial differences in intelligence. There is, for example, an observed gap between the average IQ of black and white Americans. Articles have also been published on the IQs of different nations around the world. Many of these nations are purported to have average IQs below 70. That's the cutoff for intellectual disability. How could this be? The conclusion that some draw is that there are genetic differences between races or nations in intelligence. But I think that's a gross misrepresentation of the data. The problem, I'd argue, is that IQ tests don't necessarily measure what you think they're measuring. And the proof is that there's a representative sample of white Americans whose average IQ is 70. Who are these people? Just ordinary Americans who lived around 100 years ago. Researcher James Flynn studied the average results of IQ tests over the past century, and every so often the tests get updated and renormalized to keep their average at 100. Now what Flynn noticed was that each time they got renormalized, the scores had to be shifted down a bit more, by about 2 or 3 IQ points per decade. And if they didn't do this, what we would see is that the average IQ of the whole population was increasing at a steady rate for the last 100 years, adding up to around a 30-point increase. This is known as the Flynn effect.
Were our immediate ancestors on the verge of mental retardation? Because 70 is normally the score for mental retardation.
I was tired yesterday, I'm tired today, because that makes me retarded.
30 is the cutting line for giftedness.
With the Planet Fitness Black Card, you can bring a friend anytime, and so much more when you join today.
Now, the genetics of the population haven't really changed over 100 years, so what caused the increase? Well, there is some debate about the true causes, but one of them is probably improving childhood nutrition and health.
You know, height also increased across that time period, right? People got
What? You mean feeding their brains and allow them to have nutrients to grow?
that school makes you more intelligent.
You become better at problem solving if you have more knowledge, because it's easier for you to make associations if you have more things to make the associations with.
A third proposed cause is a shift in the types of work that most people do, from mostly manual labor 100 years ago to much more abstract thinking these days. And that shift may have made us better at answering the types of questions that are asked on IQ tests. The point is that IQ tests appear to objectively measure intelligence, but they don't. Even in the same country, separated only by time, cultural changes can affect the average scores on IQ tests. So why shouldn't we expect cultural differences between groups at the same time to have the same effect? Some tests go so far as to label themselves culture fair, meaning the questions should be equally valid for all cultures. But the truth is, it's impossible to construct such
I'm just
tests.
bullshitting this right now.
No.
Trying to just
No.
roughly place them where I want them to be.
Marketing term. I don't think there is such a thing as a completely culture-free or culture-fair test.
Culture-fair tests assess visual relations, geometric shapes, and patterns, ignoring the fact that cultures differ in, for example, whether they have words for shapes or spatial relations. These differences influence how people think about and use categories. It's also debatable whether cultures without printed materials even perceive them in the same way that we do. What culture fair tests don't assess is ethnobotanical knowledge, or training dogs to hunt, or surviving alone in the rainforest. Arguably, these forms of intelligence are more important for survival than knowing, say, the next number in the sequence. But since they are less common in our culture and we don't have good ways of measuring them, we see IQ puzzles as the definitive way to quantify intelligence. And the people who make these tests agree. There are stringent requirements before a test validated for one population can be used with a very different population. Even in the limited forms of intelligence that IQ attempts to assess, there are factors other than G which affect the final IQ. Like motivation. How much someone is incentivized to complete the test can have a marked impact on their score. Many studies have tried paying subjects to complete an IQ test. In some studies, they're offered a little, say around $1. Other studies offer between $1 and $10, and the real high rollers offer more than $10. A large meta-analysis showed that motivating people in this way increased IQ, and the larger the dollar amount, the greater the average increase. At the high end, IQ increased by up to 20 points. The effect is largest for those with below average IQs, so in addition to G, IQ tests also measure motivation. But it doesn't stop there. They do rotate. Training and coaching for an IQ test can boost scores by up to 8 points. I just completed the test in some random notice, barely talk after that. It seemed pretty fair. There were lots of different sections. The math section in particular, I feel like I killed. Those questions were easy. I would say, having done the test, I feel like that should be trainable. Like, you should be able to train someone to do that well. Test-taking strategy is also important. Some people are just better at taking tests under time pressure than others. I think the hardest thing about the test was the time limits, looking for the patterns in a series of shapes. And it just normally takes me a little while, and so I feel like I didn't finish those. You have to know when to skip questions, how to eliminate clearly wrong answers, and when to guess. Anxiety also plays a role. Apparently, a small amount of anxiety is good, but past a certain point, it negatively impacts performance. I guess the overall review is, I think I did okay. And I think the training actually really, really helped. That's my prediction. Let us fast forward to the future and see how I actually did. I actually got my results from the author of the IQ test I took.
There are three areas, three specific areas.
For the math one, for the numbers ones, I think that's where I felt really comfortable, and I got there before the time was done, and then I could go back and look at a few things.
Yeah. you blew the roof off the quantitative one. On the quantitative, it was 143. Whereas on the crystallized
10,
intelligence
5,
index, it was
4, 3,
142. Fluid
2,
intelligence index was 118,
7,
which still is a higher score
6.
than 88.5%.
It's not bad, but it's interesting that one is significantly lower, I guess.
And that's
There we go.
a difference. Around that concept of G, people have strengths and weaknesses. If we were to look at the best estimate of G for you on this set of tests, and it'd be different if you took a different test, was at 134, which is higher than 98.8% of the population.
Wow.
Hopefully you're not disappointed with any of that.
No.
Last time I was tested, I'm higher than him.
I feel like my motivation was...
I'm probably higher than him right now.
So, what is IQ good for?
Absolutely nothing.
Neuroscience, and about 90% of my cases are death penalty. One of the most common issues is what's referred to the Atkins defense, after the name of the U.S. Supreme Court case that eliminated the death penalty for people with intellectual disability.
Can't the criminal just throw the IQ test? Can't they just intentionally answer every question wrong?
We know that. I mean, we include, just like in the test that you took, there are embedded measures of invalidity. It's detected using various mathematical algorithms. We're better than 95% accurate
I want to use
detecting people who are attempting to
both
fake
intelligence
poor
and
performance.
wisdom somehow.
And Doug.
There it is, Limu, the 50-yard line. Soon we'll be telling the whole stadium how Liberty Mutual customizes car insurance. To save people hundreds! Whoa.
What you want? Ooh, baby, I got it. What you need?
My cats are definitely on the naughty list this year, but I was doing a little holiday browsing on Chewy. They have the cutest holiday gifts. I couldn't help myself. I saw that they had these personalized stockings, which inspired me to start a little tradition and start stuffing stockings for my cats. So let's fill them together. I asked their team of 24/7 live pet experts if they have any holiday gifts for naughty cats, and Veronica gave me some great recommendations. One being this catnip coal toy. She's gonna love it. Then I got her
Oh,
favorite
god dang it.
treat.
You stop it!
Oh, wow.
One thing that we might be interested in doing is to boost people's cognitive ability early in life so that it takes them, even if they go into cognitive decline, it takes them longer to reach the point where they'll have sort of functional, actual everyday problems where they lose independence, whether it comes to dealing with their money or whether it comes to dealing with reading labels, whatever it is that people struggle with when they get into kind of later stages of cognitive decline. If we could discover a way to lastingly boost people's intelligence, that would be massively helpful.
Maybe its best use is in identifying individuals with strong intellectual abilities who haven't otherwise been able to demonstrate them.
Teachers would recommend that a kid gets put in the gifted and talented program because generally they'd observed them doing well in the classroom. But if you replace that with a standardized test, an IQ test, you find a higher proportion of poorer kids and kids from minority ethnic backgrounds in the gifted and talented program when you use an IQ test. And the reason is that you're using an objective measure. You're not just relying on some teacher's opinion. Getting into a good school was about who you knew, or who your parents knew, or how much money your parents had. Not so much about how you were doing. The idea that you could try to develop an objective-ish measure that would try and iron out all those social biases was clearly a well-meaning idea.
IQ is something that not only psychology but the general public has a love-hate relationship with.
Tell me about that.
Psychologists hate to talk about intelligence and people's intelligence test scores and that kind of stuff. And I've had parents, when I've included intelligence as part of a neuropsychological evaluation of their kid, they'll say, "Well, yeah, I'd like to know his IQ, but we don't really care about that." What was it?
And then I also think you have the debate about IQ. Extremes on both sides, which I think doesn't help. You have the extreme of people who say, this is the most important thing ever, people's IQ is a majorly important factor that we must know about them, and we can classify them into particular schools or particular ways of education or whatever. That's on one extreme, and I think that's totally unproductive. But there's another extreme. The other extreme is the kind of blank slate view, which is that these tests are completely useless. They don't tell us anything, that they're only a tool of racism and prejudice and so on. I think that's wrong as well. And there's just this massive firestorm on both sides happening around them. And the people in the middle just get forgotten. The people who have more moderate views on these sort of topics. So, you know, I'd recommend that people look for the more moderate views on this.
I think
look at all this mess, oi!
Like
a tidy.
What's much more important, in my opinion, is how you interact with and help the people around you. Which is why I think Stephen Hawking said, people who brag about their IQ are losers.
I'm a loser, baby.
While IQ tells us something, it doesn't tell us how our lives will turn out. We have the ability to dramatically improve our outcomes by building knowledge and analytical skills. And if you're looking for a free and easy way to do that, then you should check out this video's sponsor, Brilliant.org. With Brilliant, you can master key concepts in everything from data science and math to programming and technology. Just set your goal, and Brilliant designs the perfect learning path for you, equipping you with the tools you need to succeed. They also help me understand how IQ and net worth are related by creating some amazing data visualizations. Want to learn how to think like a data scientist? Then Brilliant's latest course, Exploring Data Visually, is the fast and easy way to do it. It requires no coding skills, and instead you'll focus on the whys behind the data and analyze real data sets to learn things.
Here's the data character of it. I want to randomize my motherfucker. Set random attributes.
It's your path to understanding the world of
I don't remember if there is anything. Nope.
Science.
Goody.
And what's great about Brilliant is that all the lessons are hands-on, so you build real intuition, so you can put.
I'll give you some hand-on lessons, punk. Thank you for that, oi. Crikey. I like this dude's channel, but boy, I sure could not give a shit about AlphaFold. But we'll listen to it. I need something noisy in my ear.
Well, it was going up, and I remember talking to Tim, the engineering lead, going, this is really feeling too easy. We're having too much success. This problem can't be this easy. Are we leaking the test set, right? You know, are we doing the classic machine learning sin?
Fellow scholars, I don't really like to be on camera, but there is a big reason I am here today. You see, I met Nobel Prize winning chemist John Jumper last year, and we talked for an hour. And in that hour, I learned more than I thought I would learn in a year. It was unbelievable. And today I have the opportunity to give you this amazing gift too. So with that said, hey John.
Hello. Oh, goodness.
Really grateful to have you here today. I have goosebumps, which I have carefully hidden under this lab coat. So, what is AlphaFold and why is it important?
So, AlphaFold is a neural network, which makes it relatively appropriate for the podcast. But it is a deep learning system that predicts the result of a specific scientific experiment. And to tell you about that, I should tell you about the domain that it's in, proteins. So proteins are the nanomachines that basically drive your cell. A couple thousand atoms each. They're coded for by your DNA. When we say that DNA is the instruction manual for the cell, a lot of what it's telling you is how and when to build proteins. And so 3 letters of your DNA map to individual one of 20 chemical groups. Those chemical groups are basically just like little collections of atoms, you know, boop, 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 boop. And there's a machine, another protein in the body, that reads the DNA in a relatively complicated process and kind of builds out the proteins one step at a time, joining links in a chain or a rope.
All right.
So it takes this chemical group, attaches that one, attaches that one, attaches that one, attaches it basically the same way each time, and builds out a string of maybe 300 of these is a reasonably typical. And then what happens when your cell builds this thing is, of course, it's not a machine. Most of them are not machines that function kind of just as floppy ropes. they actually, some of parts of it are greasy, some parts of it are positively charged, some parts are negative. So
I don't mind
fold up
long
into
ass
helical
names.
atomic sheets
Lets
that will
me
pack
know what
into
the
a
fuck's
relatively
going on. You
compact
know what I'm
3D
saying?
object that is kind of the assembled working machine.
I've learned it's just easier for me to remember what the hell's going on if I just don't try to create some cryptic ass naming system.
3D, so this is kind of how the body solves this. It builds these things, they fold up into this incredibly intricate shape. And
I know this about proteins and stuff. It matters. The shapes and the angles. It's amazing. It's like, I guess, like when a protein folds the DNA, I guess it's like when and where it touches, I guess, maybe it transfers information, you know. Like, I don't really understand it. It's interesting to me.
And this happens, you know, there are about 20,000 human proteins. There are hundreds of millions, billions known proteins across all organisms. And one part of what I described is really, really easy to measure. It's really easy to read our DNA thanks to the genomics revolution. You can think of it as pennies to read the sequence of a protein, the DNA that becomes the linked amino acids. It takes a year to get the structure of a protein and really hard experiments, and they often fail and just extraordinarily difficult. If you want to put an economic value on it, maybe $100,000. So scientists do this experiment where they start from DNA, but they really want to understand how this machine works, so they need to see a picture of it. And so they determine the structure experimentally.
Why are you calculating these values, Billy?
Small villages in order to do this. But people have done it a lot. There's been an enormous societal investment because it's really important to understand this, to understand disease, to do drug development. There are about now 200,000 known protein structures, about 140,000 when we did AlphaFold. And we developed a deep learning system that goes from amino acid sequence, DNA sequence, to the structure of a protein in 5 or 10 minutes instead of a year, and does this with accuracy close to, not quite as good, but very close to experimental accuracy. And it's been used enormously. So we've predicted the structure of about 200 million proteins, every protein from an organism whose full genome has been sequenced. Scientists are using it for drug development, to understand the body, everything else. And I think from a machine learning point of view, it's both kind of the first problem really, really transformed by AI. It's an extraordinarily practical system that scientists are using. I think it's something like 3 million scientists have used our database of predictions. People make predictions every day with this. And it's also this kind of promise that we're going to use AI not just to do things that humans can do or solve human problems, but to do kind of superhuman level. There are no humans that are good at getting the structure of a protein by eye. They do it with experiment. That we can use this to transform science, that we can build new tools that fundamentally advance our science.
What are you doing in a meeting that could have been an email? Losing interest. Don't let it happen to your money, too.
You're doing that minimum maximum bullshit.
Now, I remember asking you last year, how did it feel when it first started working?
The time I really remember is that when it first started, or really what would happen is we kept, AlphaFold is built iteratively. It's not yesterday we didn't have AlphaFold, today we did. It was maybe 2 years and probably 30, 40 different kind of individual ideas that worked along the way. Some grand ideas, some small ideas, but each one kind of inching up the performance. And I remember maybe a year into building AlphaFold 2, the one that was really very successful, it almost felt too easy. It felt like too many of our ideas were working. It felt, it was going up, and I remember talking to Tim, the engineering lead, going, this is really feeling too easy. We're having too much success. This problem can't be this easy. Are we leaking the test set, right? Are we doing the classic machine learning sin? And he was sitting there going, I don't think we are. And we went back, we double checked, we zeroed coordinates in our eval set to make sure we weren't actually leaking. We couldn't.
You're an absolute idiot. The only thing you know is what body part is even being touched. Nothing else.
And I remember
absolute idiot.
Wasn't really totally sure until actually we did some structure predictions for SARS-CoV-2 proteins related to COVID. And then the experiment came out afterwards that we were really sure that, okay, we were really not leaking anything. But it was wild.
Wow. That's crazy. But that is also the...
I might even let wisdom mess with stamina in some way. Like it's a part of dexterity. Like you're quick, but are you wise in the way that you are quick? Maybe I'll let damage be in by intelligence. If you're smart, you can hit a little harder, a little more technique or something.
I like chaos. The hallmark of a pro scientist, because during a research project you miss 1,000 balls, and when you finally hit one, you don't ask questions. You celebrate. But that's not what you did. You picked apart the performance immediately instead. So it's amazing.
His voice, it amazed me. I watched him for a long time before I saw him.
When they miss, they're always interrogating, fixing.
I don't know what nationality he is, but I always thought he was like Indian.
Machine learning is a
by
craft.
his voice.
You have to be a craft
He
person.
looks like white. I don't know.
All right, now the score. I'm asking this because the score didn't jump from 0 to 100 in just one magic trick. So this was a sum of many brilliant little puzzle pieces, and each of these contribute a little to the score. You add another puzzle piece, you get another few points. And what I'm wondering is that this sounds like a linear progress. You're climbing step by step. So why is it so surprising that when you get to the peak?
So, much like Moore's law was a succession of ideas and breakthroughs that in total gave the appearance of inevitability.
Mm-hmm.
And that inevitability in the case of Moore's law was driven by, exponential growth and investment as well. When you do this, you never know if you're going to get the next win, right? You don't know. And in fact, we have charts of progress, and they don't actually go like this, right? The ideas that we list maybe go like that, but the actual progress went flat, flat, flat. Oh, what about this? Idea, flat, 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 idea. And in fact, the flat versus up, at the time, DeepMind was kind of on 6-month cycles. So every 6 months, you kind of formally continued your project, and you presented your results to the whole company every 6 months. And I remember the first 3 months, we would always try our wildest ideas, and it would mostly not work, and we would get very scared. And then about halfway through, we'd be like, okay, guys, we got to get serious. We need to not have no progress. And then suddenly some idea would hit, and then a bunch of ideas would hit. So it was always, it was alternating elation and terror. It's more, it's only when you make it really blurry.
I finished listening to this, but I think I'm done programming for right now.
It's like overnight successes, 10 years in the making, right?
Yeah, it's that sort of thing.
All right. Can you build an intuition on what proteins would look like when folded up into a 3D structure? And also, you looked at the 3D result and said, that cannot be right.
It's hard tonight either. My finger hurts.
So sometimes you can say, oh, this looks really similar to this other protein. I bet it's going to have about similar structure. That's like what humans can do, and that's people call it homology modeling. It's a very fancy name for saying, well, the sequence is similar, probably the structure is similar. So you can do that. And sometimes you can notice individual motifs. Like there were all
Oh, it's got a long time to go. I'm not going to finish listening to this. Goodbye. Smooches. As you have fun, stay curious, do things.